Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, British infantry is not a strange topic to see on this channel, but for World War I, it is something new. Now, there is I guess part of the mythos of the Great War is that it was always trenches and mud and so on, but that's not genuinely the case, especially in the early and closing stages of the conflict. So there's quite a lot you can do. What I've got in front of me is the Wargames Atlantic plastic British infantry for the Great War, and we're going to do a quick review of the kit itself before getting into painting. There'll be timestamps down the bottom, so if you just want to skip straight ahead to the painting, you can do that. All the paints will be listed in the description below, same as always, so let's get started. Now, as with most Wargames Atlantic kits, indeed all of them, there are no instructions in the box. So if this is your first time coming to World War I British infantry, some of the equipment can be a little daunting if you don't know what it is already. Now, I am no expert by any means, but still I've done the reading, so I can give you at least a crash course on what this fella's carrying. Now, first off, one of the main differences between the 1908 pattern webbing and the later stuff that you might have seen on World War II guys is the sheer number of very small pouches that he's carrying. Now, later on, your British infantrymen would be carrying much larger pouches, fewer of them, but the idea was that every man in the section would be able to carry ammunition for the Bren magazine, and that was quite long. So these guys, by contrast, aren't carrying anything but their own gear. So he's got a whole bunch of little stripper clip rounds for his rifle, and as a result, he's got fewer, smaller pouches. So that's spot on. Spinning him around to the side here, you'll see there's this funky little dangly thing, which actually looks like it is two separate pieces. And that's in part correct, because what you've got on the inside, that is the handle and carrier for the entrenchment tool, and then the outside dangly bit, that is the bayonet scabbard. So bayonet on the end there, and the scabbard is being worn. Now, strictly speaking, the carrier for these was one piece, so to be worn like this would be pretty much spot on. Quite commonly, you'd also see them strapped on separately so that they didn't bang around quite so heavily on the soldier's leg. Now, spinning him around a little further, you'll see he's got two packs. One of them you might recognize because, again, looking to the future, it's going to become the more common one. This larger pack here, this was commonly used for things like his greatcoat and less essential equipment. This big one was sometimes called the valise, and then the smaller pack was called the haversack. Now, the smaller pack was where you'd carry things like your rations, your mess tin, so this was the important one. You'd make sure that you had that one with you. By contrast, the valise was quite commonly ditched in the rear before an attack would go off, whether that was going over the top of a trench or attacking a town or what have you. The valise didn't carry anything that was ordinarily vital to the success of the mission, so soldiers would quite happily dump it. So you could ditch the haversack in the same way as they did in reality and put the haversack up higher. This little square pack, again, later British infantry, that's where that's going to look familiar from. And then, of course, you've got the water bottle hanging out on the side here. Perfect spot. The straps on this are all spot on. Nice. However, I have attached the haversack in not the wrong spot, because guys would pretty much customize. There was a prescribed method for wearing your equipment, but I have seen photographs where men are wearing their gear like this. There's a whole different range of ways you would see British troopers wearing their webbing. But there is something which is actually missing from this infantryman, and it's kind of a downside to the kit. I'm going to pop this fella aside, and we'll take a look at one of the bodies straight off the frame. Now, there is actually two things wrong here. First of all, at the bottom, dangling on the back of his butt here, should be the head of his entrenching tool. So the handle, which is attached to the bayonet frog on the other fella, he's got the handle, but none of these guys actually have the head of their entrenching tool. So they're all carrying very nice sticks. Bit of a bummer. And that's the reason why I've shifted the haversack from the side to his back, just to cover that up. The other downside, really, the inaccuracy, is this weird H shape to the webbing. This is just, it's wrong. The webbing themselves, it was a cross strap across the back, And this little bit in the center, I don't know what's going on here, but it's inaccurate. Now I know what it's like to be told, for years after the fact of having done something from every Tom, Dick, and Harry that knows better that something is wrong. But if this is the first time that you've actually seen these kits, then it's worth pointing out because it's a shame, really. It is one thing that gets up my nose, but it is one thing. If you are attaching the valise across the back, you're not going to see it. It's a non-issue if you're giving these guys their full loadout, but it is something to be aware of. Now, as well, the webbing here is really quite stepped. You see, it's very raised off the back of the miniature. Now, when attaching the valise to the other fella, I did shave this almost flat against his back, and in hindsight, I might have actually been better off to go a bit further. So when you're assembling them, bear that in mind. If you want to have the smaller haversack in the correct position, what you might want to do is actually trim the bottom of these tools, cut the heads off them, and glue them to the underside of the haversack so it looks like the haversack is sitting over the top of them, and they should then be sitting there. So it's going to need a little bit of creative knife work to get all of that sitting in place, but these being plastic, it's not going to be too difficult. Now the kit itself is otherwise really nice. One of the cool things about it is just the range of heads that's in the box. It's ridiculous. You've got the forage caps, you've got birdie helmets, you've got birdie helmets with covers, you've got birdie helmets with gas masks, and you've got the Wolseley helmets. So if you want to have these guys representing troops out in Palestine and India, that is also a possibility with the box. It's really cool. As a Kiwi, I feel as though the lemon squeezes are conspicuously missing, but... So with that in mind, with all of his gear identified and a much better picture of what we're actually doing, let's get to painting him at last. Now you will have seen at the beginning that this is a very brown uniform, so I've primed him in Zandri dust. Any middling khaki brown that you can find is going to be perfect. A light grey or even a bone colour, skeleton bone or something like that, will also work, but Zandri dust is just spot on. Now, when it comes to uniform discussions for these guys, oh my goodness, you're always going to start an argument with British uniforms. I am going to start by basically blasting most of the miniature, his uniform in fact, with Vallejo British uniform, which some are going to say is a little bit too green. Honestly, you could also look at something like US Field Drab. The descriptions of them tend to vary slightly, and honestly, we have original uniforms that are now so old, they're not much used for color matching. I would suggest to you this. If you ask any returned serviceman about uniform, they will say uniform isn't. When it's wet or you're sweaty, it gets dark. When it is dry or sunny or you've been recently deloused, it is light. There is a manufactured color, and then it hits reality. And past that point, ne'er the twain shall meet. So as long as you're in the ballpark of close enough, your miniatures look about right, you'll be fine. As a result, British uniform, maybe a little bit too green, like officially, but I think you can't go too far wrong. It is a khaki, brownish green. Okay, now we'll start laying down the base coats for his skin. Now I'm using here tanned flesh from the Army Painter. This is one of the colors that's I'm not sure if it's being replaced or just getting a new name when the Fanatic line comes out. I'm using it because I've got it. And honestly, whatever paint works for you for skin, go ahead. I think this is going to end up Moonstone skin with the closest equivalent. So if you're seeing this when the Fanatic line is out, let me know if I'm right. Now at the same time, I'm going to paint his puttees and the cover on his water bottle. For this, I'm going to use khaki. This is nice and quick, should cover fairly well over what we've put down so far. But as ever, if you need to, second coat won't take long at all. Now most of his equipment is going to be this beige color. Now I'm using here dark sand, but any medium to light beige will work perfectly well here. So Iraqi sand, buff, even the paint that's just called beige. You are going to need to apply 2 coats of this. But once you've gone around once, you've painted all of the details with one coat, it should be dry and ready for the second. Now if you end up with any spots where you have splurged over slightly, it's better to have a solid color there because honestly we can tidy up with the English uniform and it will cover quite well. So don't worry about that. I'm going to turn now to beige brown and I am going to paint over his rifle with this. When it comes to painting this, just go straight over all of the bits that are going to be black later as well. And I will also paint the handle of his entrenching tool with this off to the side. Now for his boots, leather brown, I'm going to paint leather brown. If you wanted a slightly warmer brown here, which would not have been uncommon, then flat brown from Vallejo will also work quite well. This is also a good color if you want to start painting in some of the soldiers' hair. I'm going to use a darker sort of black color later because I want to put something on him which isn't brown, but this will work for a bit of variety in your sections. And then for his bayonet scabbard itself, I'm going to apply some brown sand. Now this will look a little bit light going on, but as we shade it later, it's going to calm down quite a bit. Now for any parts that are going to be either black or blackened metal, what I'm going to use here is German grey. Now this is in truth not an actual black, but a very, very dark sort of blue-black. I like it. It covers super, super well. So any bits that are going to be black on his equipment, just dot in with a tiny bit of this now. And I will carefully paint the bits on his rifle off camera. Now I'm always a little bit amazed by how much more finished it looks once that is done. What I'm going to do now is a tiny bit of red leather. Now this is a detail which, to be perfectly honest, you could probably skip. And I'm going to struggle a little bit to get on camera here. I'm just going to paint a quick line across, oh gosh, his cap there. You see I've made a pig's eye of that. Just for the little leather strap at the front. I'm not concerned about the mess though, because I have got some English uniform I need to tidy up elsewhere, so that's not a problem. Now for the cap badge itself, I'm going to use here Liberator Gold. I like this because it is quite a light, almost beaten coppery color. And then the last of the base coats I'm going to apply is a little bit of plate mail metal on the bayonet. This is from the Army Painter, but any, shiny mid to light silver will work here. These were pretty wicked bayonets. Now once I've done this and it is dried, I'm then going to go grab my English uniform from earlier, do those little bits of tidy up where I need to, and you'll be ready for a shade. Now for that shade, what I've done is to mix up half and half Lahmian Medium and Agrax Earthshade. Now whichever shade it is you're using, I would recommend thin it out a little bit, because you don't really want to completely drench the miniature and have it become super dark. You just want to add the shading here. So straight over the top of everything, and don't let it pull too heavily anywhere that you can. So if it bunches up around a sleeve, for example, shift it around while it's still wet. But yep, the entire miniature, face, pack, gear, everything. And once you've done that, we'll come back in about half an hour once it is dried and see what we've got. Now once that's dried, you're going to have something that looks like this. Plenty of shading, just a little bit darker. And from here, what you could do would be to very quickly, I'd say matte varnish them first, then go ahead and give them an all-over dry brush, or at least on uniform and his equipment, of dark sand. You may have seen me do that in some of the World War II videos I've done. It would be an easy way to get this fella on the table very quickly. But while it would look good for an army, I do want to spend a little bit more time on this fella, just to take it a step further or two. So what I've got here, I actually mixed up a bottle ages and ages ago, which is 3 parts English uniform and 1 part Iraqi sand. And what I'm going to use this for is some highlights. But I'm going to be a little blockier with these than I normally would. The Iraqi sand will look quite extreme going on, but as it dries, it'll dull down a bit and looks quite nice for larger areas than I would normally highlight. So I'm going to go and leave all of the shaded recesses as much as I can. But as uniform, get a quick blast of this mix here. Now at the moment, some of that might be a little difficult to see, just owing to how the shade catches the light, but that looks pretty cool in person, and when we varnish this, it's going to be much easier to see. What I'm going to move on to now is some Cadian flesh tone, and I'm going to paint this over most of his face and hands, leaving just a little bit of that tan flesh in the recesses. So this you'll probably find will cover quite well. Now I've got just a little bit of water in here. And then with some Kislev flesh, what we'll do is highlight bits like his nose, his chin, his cheekbones, and bits like his knuckles. Now you can spend a fair bit of time on a face. I normally do. I quite like painting faces, but not everybody does. But it is a skill I thoroughly recommend. Do spend a bit of time practicing, because your miniatures will come out looking way smarter for it. Now we base coated our webbing with dark sand, so to highlight it I'm going to use pale sand. You don't need to use very much of this at all. If you do, it will very quickly overpower the yellow and make this look a bit more patchy. Now the last highlight I'm actually going to apply is quite a dark gunmetal color. This is Iron Warriors from Citadel, and any sort of off black metallic here will do the job. I'm just going to catch the edges of some of the metal details, funnily enough, to give them a tiny bit of shine. Now once I'm done with this, what I'm going to do is go ahead and matte varnish me chap here, and then pop a base on him. And I'll make sure the recipe for that is in the description. So let's get a look at this dude once he is all finished. And so there at last, our British infantryman is complete. And honestly, the end result I'm quite pleased with. It is a slightly different style to how I would normally go about highlighting, but it's one that I really like. And it's a style that I see normally in like gaming magazines and slightly more old school painting guides and stuff like that. I think it looks really cool. I do think it suits the time period a little bit more. And I cannot tell you why. Yeah, as a matter of choice, it's just, yeah, that looks right. I wish I had a better answer. So the kit itself, ultimately, yeah, it's all right. There is a lot about it that I do quite like, in particular the amount of heads you get in there. I do just wish that the cross across the back was correct, and the missing, head for the entrenching tool is a bit of a bummer. But otherwise, that's a neat little kit. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support, folks. It really does make the difference. And any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.